Well, good afternoon. As folks begin to filter in, welcome. We are pleased to have you with us today. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director at Episcopal Parish Network, and thrilled to host this session on thriving small parish, small church ministry. It's terrific to have our panelists with us, Lauren, Allison, and Peggy. They will introduce themselves in a minute, but we invite you to post your name, where you're dialing in from, in the chat so they can get to know you. Also asking that you put any questions that you might have or comments that you might have into the chat where they will be following them. We're looking forward to a wonderful session today. Thanks to our panelists again. And we will have another digital workshop on Wednesday around accounting practices. So please do join us for that. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Peggy Lowe and thank our panelists again, and thank you all attendees for joining us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peggy Lowe. I'm currently the Vice President of the Episcopal Parish Network. And I'm so grateful to see all of you here and to know that Joe told us just now that more than 250 people were signed up, and we were just overwhelmed in a very good way. And just want to say that, we're talking about thriving small churches, and it's from sort of our perspective, and we want to share our stories, and we'd love to hear examples from you in the chat, or to feature others in the future, because I think there's something that we can all learn from one another. I have been involved with EPN since I was a seminarian, starting when we did this sort of strategic narrative shift, and then through COVID to this shift of, EPN, formerly SEEP, is not just for large, well-endowed parishes anymore. And I feel like this has been a good time to think about what it means to be a resource parish. What does it mean to be a thriving parish? That there's other models and paradigms and folks to learn from. So I'm really excited to be part of this conversation with Lauren and Allison. So before we introduce ourselves in a little bit more depth, Allison, will you open us up in prayer?
I'd love to. Let us pray. We give you thanks, oh God, for this opportunity today to celebrate the wonderful life-giving ministry that happens within small churches. We ask that you give us open ears so that we can hear the stories that are shared, as well as the wisdom that all of the participants have to offer us. We call upon your Holy Spirit that it might weave us together in deep relationships with one another, knowing that one of the gifts of small church work is the relational transformation that happens in these holy places. We know that you are at work in these spaces, and that there are more ways to measure the success of a church than the numbers of people who attend on Sunday. We pray all of this in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. So, Lauren, I'm going to ask you to go first, to say, each of us will go around and say, why did you agree to be part of the webinar? Your name, your church, the size of your staff, and anything else you want to tell us about where you're located right now.
Sounds great. Hi, I'm Lauren Caratco. I'm the rector of Grace Episcopal Church in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, which is Westchester County, right above New York City. I agreed to be a part of this because I asked Joe if we could do more stuff with EPN for smaller churches. I particularly love that EPN is a curator of resources. The amount of times I go to the website to find how to do XYZ. And so I wanted there to be more resources out there for smaller churches. So I'm so glad you guys are here for that. Grace Church is vibrant, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in this webinar, but a couple details. I am full-time. We have, we have 6 part-time employees at Grace Church, a lot of putting things together to make things work around here. And ASA, average Sunday attendance, is not a measure of a whole lot, but some people want to know. So our ASA last year was 56.
Great.
Thank you.
I am Allison Sandlin Lyles, and I'm the vicar of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church right outside of Fort Worth. We were part of the Diocese of Fort Worth, which experienced a tremendous schism in 2009, and we joined the Diocese of Texas last year. So there are a lot of reasons why small churches are small, and we are small because our church split. And so in the years since that split, we've just been growing and getting on with our ministry. Our church is located in a 1,000 square foot storefront space. So we are small in our footprint and also small in our attendance. So we average, we're sort of around 55 to 60 on Sunday with 2 services because we don't fit in one service. And I work 20 hours a week and then have a just an exceptional, very, very, very part-time musician, and then also a deaf interpreter who are also staff members.
Thank you, Allison. My name is Peggy. I'm the rector at St. Albans Episcopal Church in Austin, Texas. One of the reasons I was excited to be part of this conversation is that I went from being really large systems to being the rector of a church. I have 4 part-time staff, music director, admin, children's minister, and youth minister. And part of the transition of both becoming a rector and coming to this church was, sort of right-sizing my expectations of I'm so used to being a church means doing XYZ, and it looks different in different contexts. And so really like learning that, really learning about ministry in place. And I also love that last year, Samuel, at the EPN conference, you talked about sort of living your size. And that just resonated with me so much of, starting to think about what it means to thrive as St. Albans and not as somebody else. And I think our ASA right now is sort of high 70s, low 80s. So for those of you who have joined us, please, if you have questions, put it in the chat. If you have resources that you feel like other folks should know about, also please put it into chat, and we can try to compile it and post it with the recording as well. So first, we want to address that question that sort of Allison ended her prayer with. What does thriving look like? How do you define thriving? Allison, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would love to. In my church, after the church split, I've been at my church for 5 years. And when I joined, there was a lot of conversation about, well, when we get our building back, we can start being a real church again. And so I spent the first year of my time at St. Stephen's just reminding them that they are already a church, that the building doesn't really matter, that you can be small and not offer as many ministries as you used to, but still very much be a church. And so we started talking about ways to measure the fact that they were a successful church. And one of our metrics is how many people are involved in the ministries of the church outside of Sunday morning. And so it's not just about that average Sunday attendance, but about the percentage of people who are involved in our various outreach ministries or our formation classes, which don't take place on Sunday morning, like a traditional formation class might, because of our space constraints. And so when we look at that, we see that, over 75% of our church is engaged in something outside of Sunday morning. And to me, that means we are a vibrant, thriving church. It has also meant that we only offer things that people are really invested in. And so we cannot spread our already small resources, both our human resources and monetary resources, into things that only 1 or 2 people are invested in. And so we have done a lot of discernment work to figure out where God is calling us and then really prioritizing the ministries that we offer.
How about you, Lauren?
I mean, I certainly want to echo a lot of what Allison just said. Those are a lot of the definitions we use for vibrancy too. A piece I might add is vibrancy in worship. When you walk into our worship space, it's a regular Episcopal Gothic church with 1867, something like that. Gorgeous, small. But you walk into this historic space, and then there are kids dropping their metal fire trucks on the floor. And so it's loud and clacky. And what happens is, instead of the glares that sometimes can happen in our church, people are so excited that there's a family and they remember the time when they were that family, that it's super gracious. As a parent of a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old, I personally am very thankful for that. But it also means that I can go with the flow, because I have children that are wonderfully loud sometimes, that when things kind of go a little bit awry in worship, I can roll with that. And our congregation really appreciates that. There's also just this energy, palpable energy in the air during worship that when you've been in a vibrant worship space, I know you know that feeling. And so that is something that I find doesn't really matter what your average Sunday attendance is. If that worship is vibrant, people are accessing their relationship with God.
Thank you, Lauren. And for me, I think one of maybe my measures is just how much noise there's in the space throughout the week. So I came to this church as we were transitioning out of the pandemic. They were transitioning from a long-term time interim into my arrival here. And so part of it has just been like, is there more noise, more activity going on in the parish hall over time? And I think, for me, lay engagement is such an important thing, not just because I'm a small parish and I need people to do the work, but I think, as Allison says, we can only take on things that people are passionate about. And it's been a great way to talk a little bit more to people about their ministry, and especially, pre or post retirement or pre or post COVID, what still resonates, what still matters, what needs do we see. And as Austin grows rapidly, literally, like, new apartments and houses are rising up around us, and people want to know, how can we get them to come here? And I think it's been so helpful to ask the question, to say, what are the gifts that we have to offer? What are the gifts of community, of that sense of being an intergenerational community, of being a loving community across political differences in a very divisive place and time? How does this speak to the potential of what church can model for the world and the communities around us? And so there's a lot of possibilities, and there's not the notion that we have to do everything, because we can't do everything, and so we're just gonna have to focus and then figure out what thrives. But yeah, I think the sort of sounds and the more outside groups we can bring into the space, not just for some amount of income, but just for ministry and helping embed us into the community. I think and lay leadership, that's been a really great mark of thriving for me. And we had talked about a couple of ministries that were thriving in each church. Lauren, do you want to talk about the children's ministry?
So several people in the chat were talking about geography, and I thought I might just take a second and say that Hastings-on-Hudson, where I live, is an area that people move to for the school districts. And so one of the things that Grace Church does when it's doing well is reflect the kind of demographics around us. I know several of you have questions about that, and I'm not sure how many we'll get to, but I can at least respond to my demographic. I am a priest and a parent, and so I do certainly show up in a collar to school events, like back to school night and that kind of stuff, and I think that helps. One of the ways, and this isn't answering Peggy's question, but I promise we'll get there, is we had a November something holiday party in my son's first grade classroom. And I went to it because I was running from the hospital to somewhere else. And when I got there, one of the other parents saw me in the collar, and it was Thanksgiving time. And they were like, no, wait, does your church do one of those pageant things? I need to teach my kids about Jesus and they don't know all that much about it. And so what I did was in that it was an opportunity to sort of say, oh yeah, we absolutely have a Christmas pageant, so you should come on over. But the story I want to tell you about thriving in children's ministry at Grace Church is that Grace Church has over time become sort of this vibrant Sunday school program that we have going on right now. And we joke a little bit that if you walk into church and you're maybe 5 or 10 minutes late, you come in and you only see probably, I don't know, 25 or 30 adults sitting in the pew, and it doesn't feel that big. Our Sunday school happens during our worship service. And then at the peace, the children come back. And so the side door opens and the children come flowing in. And it's been joked that it feels like a clown car opening up and just children keep coming and coming and coming. And so I think that's part of what feels like vibrancy, is that people who come into the church can see all of these children come from the altar area back to find their families.
Thank you. And Allison, will you talk about the transgender?
I will.
That we all have.
Yeah, so it's interesting just following along in some of the questions and the chat that's happening. I'm in a suburb, so my congregation skews older. And so even though we're only about a 15-minute drive from the city of Fort Worth, a lot of members of my church don't drive into the city. And so they really wanted to figure out how to minister to the people around them, like quite literally who are our neighbors. And this was happening before I got there, is they just started holding these community, like workshop doesn't feel like the right word, but like community meetings where they just asked the question, who is my neighbor, and invited a bunch of panelists to fit whatever the theme was. So there was who is my, like neurodivergent neighbor. And then they invited a lot of people who fit into that category to talk about what it's like to live with their particular diagnosis, and then how the church might help. We've had who is my interfaith neighbor, where we had an imam and a rabbi and a pastor from the Unitarian Universalist Church, and then also a member of the Episcopal clergy was there. But the one that ended up being the most influential was asking who is our LGBTQIA plus neighbor. And members of my church who were affiliated with PFLAG and found somebody for each letter of that rainbow alphabet. And what came about is a lot like what Kathleen mentioned in the chat, which is we realized there was a need for people who were raising transgender children. And we're in Texas, like there wasn't a place that they felt safe to go and talk about what they were going through. And so they started a transgender support group, and it met in person before the pandemic. And then we moved to Zoom so that people can join us from all over the country, and as well as their adult trans kids to their young adult trans kids, to show examples of how they might grow up. And so this is an example of us ministering outside of our church. Only a couple people in our church actually participate in this trans support group. And then we're looking outward. And that's something I think that any church, no matter if you're located in an urban area or suburban or rural area, just figuring out where the gaps are and then trying to meet that need and being creative about it. One of the things that we've learned with our small church ministry is that we can't just pretend to be a baby big church. We use that language a lot in our small churches big impact group. That we can't just look at the model for a big urban church and then shrink it down. So just like half the number of staff, or like really minimize the budget and just try to do all the same things, but on a different scale. And these are the things like when we start to think creatively about how we do outreach, when you don't have a lot of money or a lot of people, or you're not close to a city, you just have to, it takes a little bit more creativity and flexibility, which I think is one of the gifts that comes with serving small churches.
And so looking at there are a couple of questions in the Q&A that could be answered quickly, so I just wanted to tackle those. So Lauren mentioned the website with some resources. So that's the Episcopal Parish Network website. All the workshops like this one are archived, and so you can go and watch the recordings. And I was going to say too that one of the things that has been helpful in terms of looking at deferred maintenance or utility is just how much to budget for it. Like my junior warden watched the most recent one on under the administration category, and she was so excited about learning about that there are these formulas for budgeting for it and to thinking about it. And so it's not something that we have in a manual. And so she was so excited. She watched it. She like took screenshots, and then she watched it again, and she wants to talk about it at the finance meeting next time. And so, right, that's one of those things too. Like there's only so much that we can learn in seminary or learn at any one time. And it's helpful to, I invite you to look on the website and look through all the different categories, depending on, there's stuff on administration and stewardship. They're talking about different kinds of missions as well. So the Episcopal Parish Network website, and there's a section for workshops. And the other thing is, I think there are some folks who are saying, are comparatively right, like our ISA can feel small or big depending on who you're comparing yourself to. And I think that's why we sort of made it a point at the beginning to say that, like, we're trying not to think about ASA as a measure of thriving, and we want to focus on talking about these ministries and resources. And also one of my vestry members went to a diocesan thing for new vestry members, and she was so inspired by this other church that had, ASA of less than 10, but they're undertaking this ministry that connects a nursing home in their community with the high school, where they're training kids to make food. And so it's kind of like, it is really about, there's not a one size fits all solution. And we're all talking about somewhat different places, but to say that, like, these are hopefully something resonates with you in terms of how you're looking around at your neighbors and the folks in your church, and how to connect, help folks make those connections. The other thing that we wanted to talk about was that, when you're the only staff person, or when you're the part-time staff person, how do you draw or maintain boundaries, or make this a life-giving, healthy relationship?
I can share a little bit. I received some really good guidance from someone who had been working 13 hours or 15 hours a week, I think was how much she was working as a priest in the Diocese of Michigan. And her small church was under 20 people. And she really encouraged me to think about taking a Sunday off every month and having that as part of my letter of agreement, and not a vacation Sunday. And for her, in her church, they did morning prayer on that Sunday off. And again, one of the benefits of small church ministry is that the priest can't do everything. If you even have a priest, I know a lot of small churches don't have a regular priest. And so baptismal ministry becomes really, really important. And so doing morning prayer once a month in her context became another way for her congregation to exercise that leadership. In my context, I had a retired priest who is a member of my congregation who supplied for me. And now I have a steady rotation of school chaplains and retired priests and morning prayer. So one of the things that does is it allows me to use the time that I would spend writing my sermon, creating the bulletin, because I am also the church administrator, and preparing for Sunday to sink those hours into pastoral care. And once I put it that way, people were really, really on board with it. But what it really does is remind everybody that I am part-time. And so when they don't see me once a month, and I changed that Sunday, it's not always like the third Sunday of the month, so that attendance goes down because the vicar's gone. That's been really helpful. The other thing is I don't live close to my church. And so I live 35 minutes away without traffic. And I know that is the case for a lot of small church clergy. And so people are very quick to call on one another if they need something, instead of immediately calling the priest. The lay leadership is so strong in my church. And so for me, I think it's really important as the vicar that I'm not threatened by it, that I don't feel like they're keeping something from me because I didn't know that somebody went into the hospital until after they already made a few other calls. And then they know that I will do pastoral care over the phone and that I'll be there in person when I can, or if it's an emergency. Because I do have 2 kids at home, and I also have another part-time job. And so I work 10 hours a week as an editor, and that allows me to continue working at a small church that doesn't pay what one might be making, this far into their priesthood. But it's a ministry that I really love. Lauren, how are you keeping your boundaries?
Yes, I am full-time. I saw the question in the chat about if we're part-time, what our other jobs are. I'm full-time. And one thing I want to show you guys, I love to read self-help books. So you are welcome to make fun of that. But like, if there's something out there that I might steal one line from to help myself, I do. One of them is Laura Vandekam's I Know How She Does It. She explores what she defines as successful women and how they spend their time. They do time studies and time charts. And when I was reading through that book, I decided to do my own time study, and I realized that I was doing something which she calls split shifting. You all may know about this. I didn't until I read the book. But it's essentially what I'm doing with my time is I drop my children off at school and then I work during the school day. So if a parishioner wants to meet me or I need to have a church meeting, I'll say I can meet you between 8:30 and 2:45. And then I go pick up my kids. And then I personally tell my parishioners that I'm not working in that afternoon time. I pick up the kids from school, we do whatever after school activities they are, we make dinner. And then remembering that many of my parishioners are still working and they're working in New York City, so they need to commute back home. They don't need me in the afternoon times. They need me, want my attention in the evenings. And so I often am not working in that afternoon section of time and I'm working at night instead. So there's like tomorrow night is vestry meeting or those kind of things. So that's how that works for me. Peggy?
So one thing I've learned is to ask for help. I asked for one. It was really a gift that when I first came to Austin, Bishop Brian happened to convene a lunch with other women, women leading parishes in and around Austin. And so I got to meet a few other people. And so I asked for help a lot because there was a lot, sometimes your diocese has answers about some things, but not other things. And some things are a little bit local, like somebody asked about, facilities use. I got templates from a couple of different places to try to draw up ours. So that was really helpful. Just right. And I asked for help from other folks who've done this before. Like, how did you? And people have been really great about offering. Like, I've been where you are. If you need help, let me know. And one of the bigger parishes with the bigger staff has sent me help, like preaching help every once in a while, because I don't always have the budget for, and we get the Sundays off, and then there's just that relentless pace, and every once in a while it's really helpful to have like 1 or 2 other Sundays off in that year. So they've been really great about helping with that. So I asked for help, and I try to be as honest as I can about what I don't know. And so it's been that helps. And the other is I've really learned to try to set priorities, and I say try because it's a working process. I tell myself and all my parishioners and my vestry that we can have 3 parties at once at most. Like, any more than that isn't good for me or good for you. And also after the pandemic, for some of the ministries, we've had really honest conversations where I was really grateful people felt like they could tell me that they were tired. And I'd be like, yeah, I totally understand, and this understanding that we are all human and we are all trying our best to listen to God's call and what that means for us now. And to say, there are things that we need to rest at some point. we should and we can, and that's important, right? To affirm. I jokingly said, since I'm the 7th rector, that I'm going to be the Sabbath rector, and that doesn't mean that I'm going to take time off all the time, but just like I'm going to talk about that, and encourage all of us to think about what it means to be and not do, and to have our value and our worth. I think we talk about that in terms of ourselves as children of God, but I think that's true of our churches as well. Right. And that goes back to our definition of success. Is it that we need to generate so much, or are we witnessing to a different kind of life, a different way of living together in the community? So that's.
Peggy, I'd love to piggyback a little bit on
Mhm.
something that you said, just in terms of asking for help with this clergy network that you've created. I think one of the gifts of small church ministry is that we know that we can't do it all ourselves. Like, your clergy can't do it all. We can't keep coming back to the well of very active volunteers to do it all. And so I have found that small church leaders, whether they're lay or ordained, are less proprietary over their resources than the leaders of larger churches, which feel like it's theirs, like it's their product and they don't want to share. I know that that's not everybody. That has been my experience in the churches that I have served. And so I feel like if we have something that's working, we want to share it. Like, there's a whole thread going on about this discernment work that I did at my church. Like, I got it from another clergy colleague. And so one of the hard things is that we don't have staff meetings. Typically, we don't have like that creativity that comes from working with a group in our context. And so I think this is a time where our diocesan leadership can be extremely helpful of small churches by helping us create those networks when we don't know who to ask for help. So I know, like, in the Diocese of Texas, there is a small church network that shares resources and amplifies the work that other churches are doing, and they get together twice a year at the diocesan camp. And then the Diocese of Colorado, I know, has a task force, the Diocese of West Texas. There's just so many ways that we can support each other and share these resources. I've thrilled with the bishops and the canons who are on this call, who want to learn how to better support the small churches. Because we hear you, like we know that you're tired. We know that your work matters, and that often it goes underappreciated just because you're not producing the big, fancy, humongous like product. But don't be afraid to ask for help and to widen your network.
Allison, will you also talk about the podcast and a couple of the other items that you have?
Yeah, I would. So I'm a member of what's called Small Churches Big Impact Collective, and we received a very generous grant from Austin Presbyterian Seminary to create a few seasons of a well-produced podcast. And just like, I mean, the three of us are all women clergy. We were all residentially seminary trained. We are all in closer to bigger cities. We are not reflective of all of your churches. And so the Small Churches Big Impact podcast tries to speak with leaders, both lay and ordained, of a variety of different small churches, and to share some wisdom of things that are working well for them, where their moments of joy are, and really just trying to amplify this work. And all of those are available. There's 2 seasons available, and wherever you get podcasts, and a 3rd season will be coming out in Advent. And in addition to that, we also offer small church chats. There are, I think, 5 that meet every month for any leaders that want to jump on for an hour Zoom call and ask questions. Like, for me, it is the end of September and I still don't have a stewardship chair because I don't know who else to ask. Everybody in my church has already done it before. And so like real questions, I need help with this. Can someone help me? Yes, I've got a stewardship letter already written. You can just have someone send it and maybe make it a little bit more in their own language. So y'all will get our contact information. Just let us know if you want to be included in any of those.
And Allison, there were a couple of questions about the discernment process you all used. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the discernment process happened because we were at the end of this lawsuit and we really assumed that the Episcopal Church was going to win, prevail is the word that we're supposed to use. And that the breakaway group would have to forfeit the buildings that they had been inhabiting for the past dozen years. And so our discernment work was really trying to figure out what God was calling us to do and who God was calling us to be, and if that fit with this building that we assumed we would get back. Then the pandemic hit. And so our discernment work was paused, and then the lawsuit ended, and it did not go how we thought it would go. And so finally we picked up our discernment work again. We had a team of people who, these are not your bishop's committee or your vestry members. I mean, maybe a couple of them, but you really want to pick the people who are prayerful, who are going to be listening, who can gather information and sort of sort through it in a prayerful way. So we all knew that our space was too small, but we didn't want to just go get a bigger space. We wanted to know what the space was going to be used for. And that was really what the discernment work was about. After our team was trained and did a whole lot of prayerful work, we hosted a series of listening sessions. And this was not like cocktail hour. We did not serve food. There were no drinks. Like, you came to the church. It might work better if you had it in someone's home. And we had everybody divided up so that they were even. And then 3 representatives of the discernment group were at each one. And each person was asked to come with the answer to this question. They were reporting their responses. We were not having a conversation. Who or what is God calling us to do outside of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Hurst, Texas? And what do I need within St. Stephen's to further my relationship with God? So we wanted one outward question and one inward question. And all of the responses were recorded. And then in a very sophisticated way of measuring things, we passed out 3 circle stickers from my kids' sticker collection. And you went through and put stickers on the 3 areas that were not just important to you, were not just what you thought we should be doing, but where you were willing to invest your time and your energy. And so we got a real good look when we held those across the different listening sessions of where our energy was. And you know what? It wasn't in attracting children. Like, I'm hearing all these things about we need kids. People with young children they come with debt. So like the old measure used to be, we want to have young families because that'll grow our church. It might grow the numbers of people, but it will not grow your budget, most likely. And so people had really gotten over what we should be doing. Instead, it was really focused on what God is calling us to do. And we realized we don't need a lot. Like, we really just need to double our footprint in terms of space so that our choir does not rehearse in the same place we have coffee hour at the same time, because that gets really hard. And that we can all worship together at the same time. But we don't need a ton of classrooms. We don't need a lot of storage. We don't need a lot of offices, because most of our ministry happens outside of the church building.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we had somebody from the Mission Amp team in the Diocese of Texas come and lead our vestry retreat, and they did a sort of similar thing, right? Asking them to talk about what excited them, and again, like, what would they put energy toward. And I've been invited to a couple of things, or seeing a couple of things that's a model, right? Looking at discerning your gifts, you're looking inside, looking outside, and looking how to connect the two. And also, we did a Holy Cow survey. They did one when they were looking for when they started the search process, and we did one when after half a year after I started, almost a year after I started, because I said, they asked us questions at the beginning of the pandemic, and now we're coming, or hopefully coming toward the end, or this different phase of it. And where are people at now? Like, what are your energy levels like? What are you still interested in learning about? And one thing the interpreter said that was so helpful and that we really took to heart again in our vestry retreat was that she was like, yes, all the churches say they want small children or they want to grow, but like, why do you want to grow, right? Like, do you want to grow because you have all these gifts that you are excited to share, or are you growing out of this fear of, if we don't grow, then the church will disappear, or, and so she's like, that makes a huge difference in sort of how you reach out to people or how you welcome to people. And the other analogy she had, I really liked, she was like, if you're on a big cruise boat and you sail into harbor, you can't, for somebody else to get on your boat, they have to be about the same size, right? And so she talked about that in terms of, being conscious of your community. Do you have young children? Do you already have young children and families who could talk to people, or are you situated, look at what you have and not what you wish you had, and how do you encourage and grow them? Lauren, I see you nodding. Do you want to jump in?
I'm just totally agreeing with you. The line I want to add is lay leaders and clergy leaders alike, when you're going through and say you're in a vestry meeting and you're trying to decide what time you're going to move your service to or something. I don't know. You're going to make a big decision that's going to affect your people. And you get to the end of the thing and you've made the decision, okay, we're going to have 2 services on Easter this year instead of just 1. Then at the end of the thing, say, okay, who's going to come to the one that's at sunrise at 6:30 in the morning, and get people to raise their hand and see if they're going to do that. And then, okay, who's going to do the one that's at 10 o'clock at the church? If we think like the idea of having an Easter service at sunrise is great, but nobody actually wants to go to that service, maybe we shouldn't do that. And so I get to the end of several vestry meetings and I say, okay, now who's actually going to do that thing that we just said we were going to do? And we literally go around and like raise our hands if we're going to do it. And if only a couple people want to do the thing we just decided we were going to do, then we stop that plan and we start again. So I would add that to the conversation.
And that's totally something you can do in a small church that you could never do in a larger church. I mean, that's just, yeah, it's incredible.
The other thing I kind of want to say is one of the things that Grace Church is really great at is our community. Like, our coffee hour is wonderful and folks like to be in coffee hour and they have real conversations, just not about the weather. And there's a real pastoral sense to our congregation, which does feel very small church to me in the best possible way. And part of me just wants to reach through the screen and like give you guys a big hug from Grace Church and say, it's going to be okay. Like, you are loved, you are following God, and like try to share some love and care for each other, because it has been a hard time. That's all. I just want to hug you guys.
And I think one thing too, being part of a smaller church has given me this, like there's only so much I can control, right? Like, I can't control what goes on around us. I can't control how now we're on this frontage road and now there's only 1 lane going past instead of 2, and people are going to really miss this turn when they go down. There's like going so much I can do. That's an encouragement to look at where there is energy, in the congregation that's not like that's not going to be driven by me. And we are talking about having, one of the vestry priorities was sort of alternative services, and and we had to have the conversation that this isn't just about adding another Sunday morning service, like this is about like, if we are going to reach out to folks and do something different, or do something for folks who might not come to a Sunday morning service but might come to like a Sunday evening, more Compline, more evening prayer, more night prayer, Compline type service, quiet, can we add sort of Christmas lights along the altar rails, like, and can we add, instead of incense, do the diffusers, right? And a couple of people have those diffusers, and to use that to sort of tap into the senses. And so, how can, doing something different that is not just to split the people we have already into yet smaller groups, but to actually open up, what will you invite people to, that like, if you're not sure if you're going to invite them on Sunday mornings, invite them to this thing in the evenings, like, or so one of the other questions is we want to talk about, sort of talking about what growth means for you and for your church, and why do folks want to grow?
Yeah, we
Lauren?
found in our church, I just wrote this. Someone had mentioned their like social justice groups have been attractive to new members. I have found that younger people, young in the Episcopal Church, I know is very relative. I would say under 50. People just want to be at churches that are relevant, that are not pretending that life doesn't exist outside of our church walls. And I know that not all clergy, not all churches are receptive to that. In my church, thankfully, they expected me to address things that are happening from the Texas government, or just basic human rights violations that are happening around us. And so what we have seen, what I keep hearing is that for instance, the transgender support group, because we offer that, we got listed in gaychurch.org's directory. And so that's a place, that's where a lot of people find out where we are, because they're sure not finding it out from our signage. So because we offer this support group, that says a lot about who we are as a church and who we're going to welcome. So whether or not we have any trans people in our chairs on Sunday morning, they know that they would be welcome because we offer this church. And so the people who end up coming to us are a lot of people who've been told there's no place for them in the church by whatever church they were raised in. And that could be because of their gender or their sexuality, or it could just be because there's someone who always asks questions and has doubts about God, and there wasn't room for that in their faith tradition. And so I think it's really important for us that even if you are small and you don't have resources that the bigger churches might have, that you just try to find a way to be relevant in what's happening. And so I think that community engagement is so important, and that keeps coming up in the chat. And so someone wrote, we have a lot of people who are lonely in our town. We've started a nursing home ministry at my church because that came up in our discernment group, that we want to reach out to people who are grieving and who are lonely. And so we reached out to a nursing home that wasn't too far from our church building and asked if there were residents who never had visitors. And it was very easy to get the 12 people who lived there who don't have any visitors. They had just been parked there by out-of-town family. And so now we visit them. Either we make phone calls or we go and visit in person. I'm leading a hymn study there once a month on old hymns that I definitely did not grow up singing, but they know by heart. And then we have a grief support group that is facilitated by 2 of my church members. But what ended up happening is that it was a way for people to reach out to someone they knew who was grieving the loss of some kind. Some of it is a person, but others was a move or a job loss. And they're able to come together into a church space that doesn't look like a church space because we're in a storefront, and build community that way. And so we might get members out of that, but that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because we feel like this is one of the ways that God is calling us to interact with the people around us.
And I love that. I was just thinking as you were saying that we have nursing homes around us, but so far, one has contacted us to do a service, and they wanted us to do a service on Sunday morning. And it's like, well, that doesn't really work.
And it's that creativity. So every big church where I've worked, the staff has been responsible for a Eucharist once a month at some sort of nursing home. So I assumed, this is what I've always done, I'm going to offer this service. Well, the activities director at the church was like, no offense, Pastor, but I don't think they're going to know what communion is. We're mostly Mormon and Southern Baptist and Church of Christ here. And I was like, okay, so I don't think I'm going to be able to offer a service that they're going to want to attend, but I bet that we could sing hymns together. And so it was that whole like trying to think through like, when can I make time for this in my 20 hours a week that actually works with them? And so it's been hard, and I'm only able to commit once a month. But now I know the song Rock of Ages, which I did not know a few months ago. Mhm.
Lauren and Allison, there have also been questions about sort of from both sides, sort of how much support do we receive from our diocese, and also maybe we can speak to what kind of support you wish were available to small churches like yours or other churches here. Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren, and I am in the Diocese of New York, which is currently in a bishop's transition. And I have been a squeaky wheel for a long time about this. And so I just keep getting appointed to various different diocesan committees. And one of them is where we're going to start reviewing our mission as the Diocese of New York to try to figure out what the diocese is doing and how the diocese can serve the congregations instead of the congregations serve the diocese. You know, it's kind of a crazy idea, and Allison said they're bishops on the call, so I'm excited to put my foot in my mouth. But I will say that when I reach out to any diocese, but particularly this one, and I don't hear back, I have decided to become a squeaky wheel about that and to just keep reaching out until I get an answer. One of the things I didn't tell you guys is Grace Church was hit by Hurricane Ida. All 3 of our buildings flooded. It was terrible. If you need to fight with church insurance, I can tell you lots about that. But I kept reaching out and I was not getting help. And so eventually I reached out to like the chief of staff and was like, this is not okay. I need help. So I encourage you, if you're not getting much from your diocese, to reach out, because it's not like they don't care about you. They might just be busy and overwhelmed. And so it wasn't any sort of willful neglect. It might have just been busyness. Allison?
Yeah, so I'm sort of in the opposite side where now that I'm in the Diocese of Texas, there is a lot of support, but I would rather not have the bishops like knowing everything that I was doing. I don't know if the bishops are on the call or not. So I like flying under the radar, and if we need something, we'll reach out. And part of that is coming from the Diocese of Fort Worth, where we didn't have a local bishop. And so I would ask people around me for help. Some of the things that have come up in small churches, big impact, is having dioceses make grants not only available, but accessible, so that we know that they exist, so that you can have well-trained clergy. Like, small churches deserve good clergy. We have been depending upon retired clergy who are exhausted to serve as supply priest in small churches for so long, instead of clergy who are at the prime of their ordained life. I am in a diocese now. I know this is unique and from a place of privilege that offers health insurance for clergy. And so that has taken a huge load off of my spouse, having to find a job that offers family health insurance, because we have had to pay that out of pocket before. And it was a lot. Like, I felt like basically my whole salary. So having financial resources available from the diocese would be really helpful. Offering grants to attend programs that are actually tailored for small churches at times when small churches could actually, like, their leaders could actually be there, knowing that they might be multi-career clergy, or that the leaders of your church might have day jobs. And then also sharing things like bookkeeping. It's really hard to find a bookkeeper for a small church, because you end up having a treasurer who does both, which has been the case in my church, or you have someone who's overworked and they're just tacking it on to their job. So I think that's one of the things that a diocese could do, is name a bookkeeper or an administrator who could share multiple churches, in the same way that clergy sometimes have a multi-call parish.
We're talking about that in New York as well.
Oh, great.
Yeah, yes, yes, and yes, and yes to all of that, to say that that's, making space for conversation and supporting, these kind of networks. And it sounds like too from the chat that there's a number of different dioceses working on different ways of supporting their small churches. Like if the folks working on those at a diocesan level could talk to each other and figure things out. And I think when I started here too, some of it was just like, okay, what's a what does a facility use agreement look like? What is how can my website look like? It's not from the 1980s. Is there just like a template I can use and just change the colors? Or the other thing, so I had asked around for website things that are, websites that are easily you can easily change, that we can manage. One that doesn't do, also membership management, right? So like some folks use Realm, some folks, somebody recommended Breeze to me, and that's worked so far. And I think different people have found different things that work, but even those kind of basic things of like, this church for a while was just, everything was managed with the admins like Google contacts, and then it became like a spreadsheet, and then it went into this thing that was kind of attached to our our website, but nobody knew exactly how, and we couldn't pull any like helpful information out from there. So it's like there's been that transition just to figure out like, okay, so if there are go-tos, or gosh, if all the dioceses pull together, maybe we could get a really good rate from some of these places. Any last thoughts before we close? We're coming close to 3, and I know folks.
Can I ask a question of those in the chat? One of the things I love about coming to these things is the like one nugget I get to steal and take home to my parish. I don't think we have time for all of us, even on the panel, to say each of our things. But if there is one thing that has been like really helpful in your ministry, would you be willing to type it in there so we can share those resources with each other? That could be like a website suggestion, that could be curating some sort of resource. Mine is, at every single worship service, I say, hi, I'm Lauren, I'm the priest. I would love to take you out for a walk or go for a cup of tea to get to know you more and to share that kind of community love that Grace Church has. And you'd be amazed at how many people take me up on that. And so if you have those kind of tidbits, will you type them into the chat before we leave?
For my church, when new folks come, we invite them, and it's really obvious who the new folks are, right? And so we invite them to fill out something they want, but we also give them a loaf of bread before they leave. And so I have longtime parishioners who still remember that loaf, and it's been also a great ministry for folks who can't commit to a certain time. They get an email that says we need more bread, and they bring it and put it in the freezer, and it's been a sign of welcome. I've met other priests who was like, yeah, I visited your church as a seminarian. I remember the loaf of bread. Allison?
I mean, right now, the thing that is saving me is Canva for nonprofits. Anybody who has applied for nonprofit status with Canva will know they will likely tell you no the first couple times. I had to apply 3 times before they finally had all the information they needed. But Canva is a graphic design software. And as someone who is doing all the administrative marketing, website material, newsletter, everything at my church, I really love that I can make something that looks professional in a very short amount of time. I'm using it to make slides for my formation class that I teach on Zoom every Monday night. And then business cards, Blessing of the Animals flyers, we use it for everything. So Canva is not a secret, but if you applied for the nonprofit status that gives you access to every design they have, and they turned you down, I encourage you to try again.
It's been fun to just see all the wisdom flowing through the chat, and thank you
I
all
can't wait to read
for sharing and your resources and your questions. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Lauren and Allison, for your time and for sharing your stories. And just a reminder, this webinar, the video, and also the chat's going to be sent out to all the attendees. So if you hadn't had a chance to sort of catch everything that's flown by, you will get the chance. Thank you again so much. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Go in peace, to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.